good to see you, Glenn.
You too.
Thanks for taking the time today to chat and connect.
Absolutely. Only we get the logo in, right?
There you go. Yeah.
I've been a registered dietitian for about 26 years now. And this is my fourth season with the Red Sox. And before that, I was 4 seasons with the New York Jets. So in terms of sports performance nutrition, what I do is everything that the team eats. That sounds simple, but it's, plane, hotels, day-to-day snacks, what they're eating, everything. I go through it with them to have a performance bias, but also have comfort foods, because as everybody knows, baseball eventually will break you. It's just 162 a normal season, 162 games. You need some comfort food after the game. So sometimes the foods are higher in fat than some people would think, but you need sometimes meatloaf and mashed potatoes when you've been on the road for so many days.
Yeah, you need something that's going to help you feel a little bit more at home. Sure, and really
got to feed the soul too,
Yeah. Well, it's awesome because you've got so much great experience. So I'm excited we'll get to kind of talk through some of these sort of myths together. Now, I've got 6 sports nutrition related myths, but I say them in quotes, right? Because as we talked about, these are really just common statements that we hear as dietitians, or we hear in the sports nutrition world, but there's maybe a little bit of truth to some of them.
Absolutely.
And they don't come from nowhere, but at the same time, they may not necessarily be 100% on point. And so there's some room there for us to provide some clarification so folks really understand, what is it that I really need to know about this?
Okay.
So first one, carbohydrate loading the night before will improve my performance on race day. Now,
I have to answer it with a yes or a no, though. I would say yes.
Okay. So I'm curious what your reaction is to this, because I think first it's helpful for people to understand, what does it mean when we say carbohydrate loading, or someone says carbo loading? What is that? Is that really the night before? Is it more than the night before? So could you help us understand maybe then, what is carb loading really?
Well, for a while I was telling people you just have to eat a balanced meal, protein, fat, and carb. But now people are scared of carbohydrates. So it's actually even more important to say carbo load, because they need to get in at least 50% of the meal from carbohydrate. And if you're eating properly, you don't need to quote unquote carbo load the night before. You don't need to do that.
Yeah.
But you should know that carbohydrates are the main fuel source of the body. So you need to have carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, at about 50% at least for that meal, for all meals. So, if you're doing a paleo, keto, Atkins, right, that's probably not your best bet. And at that point, if you carbo load, you get full glycogen stores. I mean, that's where your muscle stores energy, your liver stores energy, and you want the glycogen full power when you go out to run.
So the point is, we want to have those glycogen stores. We want to have the carbohydrates stored so that the next day when we have the race, or we have the run to home base, for example, we have that energy to get us through.
Sure,
right?
You're topping off the tank. You need to make sure you're getting in those carbs. I mean, a lot of people think that optimally that they're going to go with a keto or Atkins, and that's not optimal for a runner.
Yeah.
And yes, when you run for long distances, you are using fat as an energy source, but the body's primary energy is carbohydrate.
Right. Number 2, we've got athletes fuel by drinking electrolyte drinks. So I definitely need to have them too. What are your thoughts on that? Does the average person need to have electrolyte drinks when they're doing something like the run to home base or some other form of exercise?
First, you have to figure out, are you a sweater or you're not a sweater? That's going to be one component that I would look into. I think for the first hour, most people need water. I really just stick with the water. After the first hour, if it's going to go further than that, then you may want to do a electrolyte or a sports drink, 50% diluted sports drink. That'll work. But for the most part, I mean, if you're eating properly and you've eaten 90 minutes before the race or so, which is probably recommended, and at that point, it's a lower fat meal because you want it out of the stomach, but you're probably fine with just water.
So number 3, drinking protein shakes will make me gain muscle mass.
I love it. If that's true, then I could lay on my couch, pound protein shakes, and I would be jacked.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that doesn't work.
I think sometimes another thing that people forget is, you know, protein is important in terms of the repair and building of our muscle mass, but there are other things, other aspects of our diet that are also really important so that the protein gets used for that.
Sure, if you don't have enough carbohydrate, that protein is going to get broken down and try to be used for energy and not growth and repair of muscle. So they say what protein burns in a carbohydrate flame, because you need the carbs with that protein to have it really work. If you're going to just work out with weights and you're going to do, I'm going to do 3 scoops of whey powder after my lift, that's a waste. I'd rather you have 1 scoop of whey and a banana. That's going to win.
Right. Okay, number 4. This one is great for a race like a half marathon, or even for something like the run to home base. So I just got a sample bar or one of those gels that I've never tried before. And so I'm thinking that the morning of race day is a good time to try it. What do you think? Is it not?
Probably the worst idea almost ever.
Yeah.
Because everybody's different. What I like and affects me one way, you may hate and it affect you a different way. If it's the day of the race, you don't want to do anything different. Anything.
Yep.
Because what happens if it gives you gas or cramps or makes you use the restroom? That's not going to work really well for you for race day.
All right, number 5, don't drink coffee. It will dehydrate you before a run. Is that true? Is having a cup or 2 of coffee the morning of the run, if that's something you've had before your runs in the past and you know you tolerate okay, is that really going to dehydrate someone a lot? Or
all right,
what do you think?
In terms of coffee, most people drink too much of it and become dependent on it, and they don't get a caffeine buzz from it anymore. They just have the coffee so they don't get the headache.
Right.
So I recommend typically not to have coffee or caffeine. I'm not going to even use coffee as the thing. It's caffeine.
Sure.
I don't recommend its usage on a habitual level, like not day to day. I mean, it's short. In the short term, it can act as a diuretic, so it can have you use the restroom. But long term, I think the studies show it doesn't really dehydrate you. But the point is, if it's a short-term diuretic and makes you use the restroom, maybe that's not a good idea to do before a race.
Yeah. Good to know. Oh, last but certainly not least, we have number 6, which is I can eat whatever I want post-race. Now, as humans, people, we may have access to eat whatever we want post-race, technically, right? But what are your tips? What are your thoughts on?
You can always eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
Like, I never tell anybody ever, in my 26 years of doing this, I've never told anybody what to eat. Because like I said, it's based on where your parents are born, where you were born, what part of this country you were born, your comfort foods, what makes you feel good. So you want to eat what you want to eat after the race? I get it. And you can, if you were, feel like you were being restricted in some way, you probably shouldn't have been. But if you feel restricted and you want to have something else, okay. But if you want to have a big piece of lasagna, really high fat, carb, well, maybe have a piece of grilled chicken with it or before it to get the protein in to balance the meal, the protein, fat, and carb ratio. Because in my world, I discuss think of your stomach like a furnace, and my job is to build the perfect fire. Carbohydrates burn like paper very quickly. Protein are the sticks a little slower, and fat are the logs even slower. So to build the perfect fire, you need paper, sticks, and logs. You need carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And sometimes our cheat meals, or our meals that you think you shouldn't be eating, are very high in fat. You want to balance them out. So you want to think to yourself typically, what's my protein? I find that's easier to do because carbohydrates and fat are fun and easy to get. So it's not really.
Those are typically the feel-good things that we're going to gravitate towards as almost, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to balance the meal. But if there's something you want to eat, then, if you feel like you've earned it and you feel better about eating it at that point, okay. In my world, there's no such thing as a bad food. People always say, oh, that's bad for you. No.
I'm already thinking about what I'm going to have post run to home base this year.
Nice.
Just talking about it.
People are always saying like white bread is bad, but if you put peanut butter on it, you blunt the insulin response.
Right.
Because of the fat and protein from the peanut butter. So,
right.
It's not about just one meal, one food item per meal. It's about glycemic load, how that whole meal is working together. Because glycemic index really by itself means nothing.
Right. It's not just about that one thing in isolation. Yeah, we got to think about it all together. And thank you for talking through these with me. I think we're on the same page about all this stuff, and it's helpful to kind of shed some light on some of these myths, as I said in quotations, and think about what really is true about them, and what's going to benefit us. What should we keep in mind as we think about, you know, our next run, our next event, or even the run to home base.
Nice.
So thanks again for thanks for the time today. It was really nice to see you and
Pleasure. You
talk
too.
about this stuff.
Anytime. My pleasure. Anytime.